Okay, fine. Right. So let's start off with talking about who I am. So, and why is it I'm qualified to even do this? Well, I'm not so sure that I'm more qualified than anyone else, but bottom line is, from my perspective, I'm a chartered fire engineer, a chartered civil engineer, and a chartered building engineer. I've been in this industry for pretty much all of my working life. And so, I've seen this sort of thing happen many times where government brings out new legislation and you've got to implement it on the ground. And sometimes that's not an easy thing to do. So what I'm trying to do is give you, practical guidance so that you, first of all, understand what the new legislation means for you. And then you can find ways of making sure that you remain compliant with the law. The next thing I want to say to you is relevant for England. Now, to a lesser or greater extent, you probably understand that there's a certain amount of devolution that's taken place in various countries, more so in Scotland and Northern Ireland than in Wales. But because of that, in Scotland and in Northern Ireland, they're places that can develop their own legislation. They can form their own acts. They can make sure that they set their priorities for health and for education, etc., set their own budgets. So what the Scottish and the Irish Northern Ireland are doing around this particular bit of work is very different to what's being done in England. So I don't want you to go away thinking that anything I've told you applies across the border to Scotland, to Northern Ireland, and even to Wales to a lesser extent. The Building Safety Act is relevant to Wales. It definitely applies in Wales, but the way they're implementing it is different to the way it's being implemented in England. So again, be very, very careful, even taking it over to Wales. Okay, so if you've got, I don't know, a couple of HRBs in Scotland and you're hoping to hear something from me that will tell you about the process, that's wrong thinking. That's not going to happen here. So caveats over. Hopefully we can get started on the presentation. So I wanted to start with a bit of an overview so you understand a little bit about the background legislation here. And it starts off, I guess, with the Building Act 1984. And the Building Act is what leads to the building regulations down here. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, but the Building Regulations 2010, as amended in 2018, and I think again in 2022. But it's the Building Act that says that the Secretary of State has the powers to make regulations. And so the regulations becomes the law. The regulations, building regulations, becomes the thing that we must meet. And it guides how we design buildings. It guides how we will construct buildings, what sort of materials we'll use in buildings. And this is very, very relevant to everything that we'll be talking about afterwards, because it's all about making sure that everything complies with building regulations that have been set out by the Secretary of State. Okay. Then we have the Regulatory Reform Order 2000. This bit of legislation is the bit of legislation that says building owners and anyone that's responsible for buildings must make sure that they risk assess those buildings. Okay, you've got to go around the building and pick up any risks and deal with those risks, mitigate against those risks, so as to ensure that anyone that occupies that building has not got a disproportionate risk to their lives. Then, of course, we have this tragic event, Grenfell Tower, in 2017, and that's what really changed a lot of what we're seeing now. Bits of new legislation have come out, including this amendment to the regulations in 2018. And that amended bit in 2018 basically said, if you build a new building from now on, the external walls must be completely made of non-combustible materials. That's basically what the amended regulations, and that was an amendment to Regulation 7. Then we come to the Fire Safety Act. Now, the reason the fires are, some of these bits of legislation, they crept in and people haven't even noticed them. But it's best that you understand why they're there so that we can get a proper picture of what's gone on. And see their relevance. But the Fire Safety Act 2021 is what basically requires you to do, I don't know if you've heard of a PAS 9980 assessment, because what it did was it said, the regulatory reform order here in 2005, there was always this argument. I'll do a risk assessment of the building, but I'm not going to be responsible for the external wall because lots of people live in this building, and they live one on top of the other, and it can't be my responsibility for all parts of that wall because actually someone owns a different part of the wall. Because their flat occupies certain parts of the wall, and their front doors. I can't trouble their front doors. Their front doors belong to them. So there was this question mark about external walls and front doors of flats. Who is responsible for risk assessing those? Well, the Fire Safety Act 2021 makes it very, very clear. The person with influence over the entire building has responsibility for carrying out a risk assessment of the external wall and a risk assessment that includes the front doors of flats, as well as all the communal areas. That's the bit of legislation, the Fire Safety Act 2021. That's why everybody goes around doing these external wall assessments. Okay, hopefully that's understood. This Fire Safety England Regulation 2022 is another bit of legislation that's sort of surreptitiously crept in. And that's the bit of legislation that says, look, your fire doors, you need to check them on a regular basis. And I think it basically indicates quarterly. You've got to, every 3 months, make sure you've done a check on your fire doors throughout your building. That's the bit of legislation that focuses on there. I mean, it does more than that, but that's the key bit as far as we're concerned. Then the Building Safety Act is what we're going to be talking about today, and that has made some sweeping changes to how we see things taking place in England now. So the first thing it's done is it's brought into being this new beast called the Building Safety Regulator. And what the Building Safety Regulator is, it becomes the building control authority for all high-risk buildings in England. Now that's quite interesting because, this bit of legislation only relates to fire and to structural stability of buildings. But it becomes the building control authority for all parts of the regulations, of all parts of building regulations. Part M's about access and part A's about structure, etc. There's a whole range of issues that sit under the building regulations. Well, he deals with all of it, though this bit of legislation does focus on fire and structure. So just understand that. And if your building is more than 7 stories high, or 7 stories or more, or 18 meters or more high, then you don't have a choice. You can't choose which building control body you're going to go to. You can't choose, well, I want to go to the local authority. You can't say that. You have got to go to the Building Safety Regulator. All right? So that's an important change that's taken place. So just wanted to try and summarize, and this is not a detailed assessment of the changes that are taking place, but I just wanted to summarize for you some of the key aspects of what takes place with some of these buildings dependent on their height. So, if you've got buildings that are lower than 11 meters, you are required to do fire risk assessments. You are required to give your residents information about fire safety instructions, information about fire doors. So these are requirements with all buildings. Now, along with these 3, Once you get to 11 meters but below 18 meters, you've got to do these compulsory fire door checks on a quarterly basis. Okay, so that becomes really quite important. And then for anything over 18 meters, you've got to do everything that's required for these two, buildings below 11 meters and buildings up to 18 meters. You've got to do everything that's required there, but you've also now got to register with the Building Safety Regulator. You've got to make sure that the design of the materials that are used in external walls complies with the new Regulation 7, which basically says it's got to be non-combustible materials in the walls. So this is new builds, okay? And I'm always at pains to try and explain to people that the law does not say if you've got an existing building that is made of materials in the external walls that has some combustible materials in it, there is no requirement to take out all of those combustible materials. It's only if the risk to life safety is such that someone's life could be in danger. That's when you need to mitigate, and that's why you may need to do cladding rework. But there's no blanket rule that you've got to remove all combustible material from external walls. That's not what the government says. So the requirement is to do what is called now a PASS 9980 assessment and determine the level of risk and determine what mitigation needs to be put in place. Okay. The next thing, and then number 7 on this list, that is required is golden thread information. Now, I'm not going to go into that right now because I'll be picking that up a little bit later in the presentation. But this term golden thread comes up quite a bit in this legislation, and that requirement to make sure that your fundamental and basic information about each building is kept electronically by the owner and that person with control over the building. There's number 8 is this now new requirement for engagement with residents. And a lot of this is directly out of what came out of the inquiry for Grenfell. And some of you may remember hearing some of the survivors of Grenfell telling us that they tried to say to those who had responsibility for Grenfell that they felt that a fire was likely to happen, but they were ignored. I think what government's saying is that can't happen again. You've got to engage with your residents. And I think that what is being put in place in the new legislation goes even further than that. And I'll explain some of that a little bit later. It's about making sure that people can escape from the building with their lives. And so there's going to be this requirement for lifts, passenger lifts and firefighting lifts and firefighting equipment, just to make sure that there is the ability to deal with events like Grenfell so that we don't have that sort of thing happening again. Hopefully that's not too garbled an assessment, but like I say, this shouldn't be taken as the be all and end all. There are more details, but that's a useful overview of what's taken place. So we have a new building safety regulator, but what the Act also does is bring about what we call a principal accountable person. You'll probably hear them referred to as PAPs. Now, that's the person that has influence over the whole building. And the direction of travel about all of this legislation is that the Building Safety Regulator is given a mandate to improve building safety standards. Whether that be about the materials that we're using, whether that be about the competence of people that are in the industry, the Building Safety Regulator has a mandate to improve the standards that we are using in this industry. And he has established a robust regulatory framework for residents. And I'm mentioning this because what the residents are able to do is now bypass the building managers and the owners of the building, and actually report things directly to the building safety regulator. And that's something to be aware of. So this only applies to buildings that have 7 stories or more, or are 18 meters or more. So just to be clear, if your building is 7 stories but not quite 18 meters, it is a high risk building. Okay, so if your building is above 18 meters, but I don't know, the first 3 floors are commercial and the other floors are residential, it is a high risk building. I just want to make sure you understand the criteria of 18 meters. As long as that is met and there's, at least 2 units that are residential, that becomes a high risk building. If it's 7 stories or more, it is a high risk building. There are exclusions, and we are talking about things like the care homes, hospitals. They're not included, but everything else, pretty much, or commercial, by the way, commercial buildings are excluded. So if you've got a building that's commercial and it's above 18 meters, that is excluded from this bit of legislation. So please understand that. But wherever you've got, I'll summarize it like this: wherever you've got a sleeping risk, so someone lives there, sleeps there, that's likely to be under the jurisdiction of the Building Safety Regulator. Okay, let's just talk about some of the responsibilities of the PAP and others. Now, the principal accountable person is the person that is responsible for managing any risks associated with that building. They've got to identify the risks and they've got to mitigate against those risks. That's the responsibility that they have. But they also have a responsibility to report those risks, particularly to the Building Safety Regulator. They also have a responsibility and a duty to engage with their residents. Now, I know that this is not an easy thing for some landlords, because for some of my clients, I've seen where the relationship between the landlord and the residents has gone sour. But the Building Safety Regulator will expect to see a demonstration of your engagement with residents. He'll want to see that you have established a building safety case and a building safety case report. I'll talk in a little bit more detail about the difference between those two in a little while. But you need to have established a building safety case, and you need to be able to show the Building Safety Regulator a snapshot of how you're dealing with your building in a building safety case report. And this whole thing is about making sure that information is available and accessible. And it's about making sure it's accessible electronically, held electronically. And it actually specifically says that in this legislation. And there must be a complaints system that is working between the owner of the building, the residents of the building. That's really quite an important part as well. Now, accountable persons are people that have responsibility for part of the building. Now, they have a duty under the legislation to work with the principal accountable person in making sure that all of the risks associated with the building are identified and managed. So they've got a duty to comply and work with the PAP in terms of making sure that risks are understood, managed and mitigated. So let's just talk about your building safety case report. And I think one way to describe the building safety case report is it is a description, a narrative that is a snapshot in time that describes what it is that you are doing to identify the risks, to measure those risks, and to manage those risks. It demonstrates that you are keeping your building up to date. Now, here's the thing. With working with a few clients, as I have been doing, what I'm finding is they've got some bits of information that's missing. And because they've got some information missing, and they're never going to have all the information that's necessary to have a full set of golden thread information. So we just say in the report, we haven't got that information, but Mr. Building Safety Regulator, there is a plan that we have for the next few weeks or months or whatever to put that missing information into place. Now, some information, I'm going to say to you, is more fundamental than other information. So if I said to you, you want to go ahead and submit your building safety case report to the BSR without a fire strategy, I'm going to suggest to you that a fire strategy, given that the legislation is about dealing with fire, if you don't understand your building and how your building is to perform in the event of a fire, i.e. via your fire strategy, because it's missing, that I think it's going to be very, very difficult to demonstrate to the Building Safety Regulator that you are managing the risks associated with your building. I'm going to say to you that something like missing your fire strategy for the building is just too fundamental to miss. But there may be other bits of information, like I don't know, the layout of the building, the general layout of the building. If you haven't got a plan that shows the general layout of the building, that might be something you want to try and get hold of in a relatively short space of time, but it's not something you have to get immediately. And I'm hoping you can see the point that I'm making. Some things are really too fundamental to try to miss when you're submitting a building safety case report. Other things you could have a bit of a narrative around to explain to the Building Safety Regulator, we haven't got it, but there is a plan to get that over the coming weeks or months or whatever. You're going to have to also, in that building safety case, make sure that you have shown what sort of resident engagement you've got in place. There should be a system that you will use to inform residents in the safety matters of the building, but also involve them in dealing with some of the safety matters of the building. And then there's this funny thing called a mandatory occurrence reporting system and procedure. And what that's about is when there is an incident, say a fire-related incident, or maybe a structural-related incident at the building, there must be a process by which you will say, well, okay, an incident has occurred. Some of those incidents may be relatively minor, and so you don't report them to the Building Safety Regulator because they're easily dealt with and nothing major. But others, it'll get to a threshold, won't it, where you need to report to the Building Safety Regulator. And that sort of reporting system needs to be established in a document that communicates that to the Building Safety Regulator. He will expect you to tell him what reporting system you are going to employ at this building. Golden thread. Now, this is that digital record that I was telling you about of a whole load of documents that are related specifically to your building. And they should be kept for the entire life of your building. I'm talking about your fire risk assessments and your fire strategy, the plans for each floor of your building, your structural engineer's report, your fire engineer's external wall assessment, etc., etc., a whole range of others. And it's about making sure that information is accessible by the residents of your building, accessible maybe even for the Building Safety Regulator, but accessible for anyone who is a stakeholder of that building. Okay, golden thread information. Let me go on to gateways, because one of the things that the Building Safety Regulator has established is a gateway process. Gateway 1 is around the planning stages. Now, I'm assuming that what the Building Safety Regulator becomes is, in effect, a statutory consultee of the planning process. And you won't be able to get past Gateway 1 until the Building Safety Regulator has said all the fire safety considerations have been addressed. I'm going to sign off on Gateway 1. You will not be able to start on your detailed design until you've got all of Gateway 1 considerations dealt with. And then once you've done your detailed design, once you're doing your detailed design in Gateway 2, again, you'll have to have all of those issues signed off. So if you've got, I don't know, extended travel distances, and you need to demonstrate using CFD analysis that you have a compliant building. If that's the case, they will want the CFD analysis to have been checked by a third party and signed off. They'll want all of the drawings to have been checked and agreed and signed off as being compliant with the regulations, building regulations. And until all of that has been done, you will not be able to put a spade in the ground to start building this thing. So, what's gone on up until now, where we are building buildings and trying to get building control approval of our designs and building control approval of the CFD and building control approval of, I don't know, whatever else, fire strategy still being developed for the building as it's being built. Those days are gone. Okay, you can't do that anymore. You will not be able to put a spade in the ground until all of the design issues have been signed off by the Building Safety Regulator. And I ought to just mention to you, the Building Safety Regulator is under-resourced, and there is already a backlog of work that they need to go through. So then Gateway 3 is the preoccupation stage, where you'll do your building work. So remember, I'm talking about new builds now. I am not talking about legacy buildings. I'm talking about new builds. The preoccupation stage, when you're doing your construction phase, you will not be able to have anyone occupying that building until the Building Safety Regulator has agreed that everything that has been put in is to an acceptable standard, and they sign off the building and give a certificate for occupation. Okay. Now, I'm going to say to you, and I'm not a clairvoyant. I've been around for far too long now, and I've seen this sort of thing far too often, where the government brings in new legislation, and the rest of us on the ground have got to pick this up. I can see straight away this is going to have disastrous implications on our ability to bring forward new housing. And given that the government has a serious priority around, the housing deficit and making sure we bring about new housing, this is going to be the single thing that is going to slow that right down. And I'm going to suggest that this will go on probably for a couple of years until the big house builders go to Mr. Starmer and say, look, or Sir Starmer, and say, look, this can't go on. We cannot deliver the housing for you because this gateway process just stops everything and slows everything right down to virtually zero. So I think you're going to find that maybe in a few years' time, I'm predicting that there will be some calls to change this, because I can't see how it's going to be practically achievable going forward. So there is a requirement for registration of your building if it is a high-risk building, whether that's a new build, okay, or whether it's a legacy building. You have to register it with the Building Safety Regulator. The Building Safety Regulator has to issue you with a building assessment certificate. And what that does is, I guess it does two things. It basically says that your building complies with the regulations, but it also says your building's safe to be occupied. And that's the two things that they're trying to establish for you. But the things I want you to make you aware of is that complaints mechanism. The fact that residents can escalate their safety concerns directly to the building safety regulator, and they can bypass anyone that's got responsibility or ownership for the building and go straight to the building safety regulator. And the building safety regulator is able to come and start to investigate that complaint. So please do be aware of that. And the other thing to be aware of is that the former Secretary of State, Mr. Gove, you remember him? he put in some protections to limit the amount of money that can be charged to residents for previous defects. And I think what Mr. Gove was concerned about was, if there has been a builder that's come in and have done defective work, the first port of call must be to go back to that builder and get them to put the work right. And so the cost of that work should not land with the occupiers of that building. They've done nothing wrong. I think that's where he was coming from on that front. Also, there are various safety schemes and cladding safety schemes that are in existence that where you were able to get public funded money to do any remediation work to bring your building up to scratch. So I think efforts have been made to limit the amount of money that's placed on residents. But without a doubt, you're not going to be able to protect residents from everything. There's certain things, and I'm going to suggest to you that this legislation, places costs that have to be passed back onto residents. So yes, there's limitations and leaseholder protections for past defects, but this new legislation, I'm going to suggest to you, places additional burdens, cost burdens onto the residents, and it has to go to the residents, the occupiers of this building. And let's just talk about some of the powers that the Building Safety Regulator has, because I think that's quite important for you to understand as well. So the first thing that the Building Safety Regulator will do, and maybe one or two of you have seen this already, he'll issue you with a notice. And the notice will usually say something like, your building is identified as a high-risk building, and I require you to submit to me your building safety case report and mandatory occurrence reporting procedure, change control procedures, etc. And I'm going to give you 28 days to produce that information. So you'll say something like that. So a few people will have got that already. So do be aware. They have the ability to enter your premises. Now that's interesting, because what they can do is they can come into your premises and they can seize any evidence of you not managing your building properly. And they can require you to provide them with evidence. And I guess if you obstruct them from doing so, they could bring charges against you for doing that as well, because they have a legal right to require information and to seize evidence. They're able to prosecute in the court of law. And this is an interesting thing as well. I mean, it's no different to what the Health and Safety Executive do, and I don't know if I said, I probably didn't say, but the Building Safety Regulator sits within the Health and Safety Executive, and they use the same sorts of mechanisms. So when it comes to charging for their costs, all they do is they just pass the bill back to you. So if they are doing an investigation into you and your building, how your building's managed, all they do is pass all of that investigatory cost back to you. Okay, and you will be required to pay it. They have the ability to insist on more frequent inspections. If they think that the building isn't being managed as it should, they can say, look, I want to go in quarterly now because I'm concerned that you're not running this building as you should. Okay, so do be aware of these and other sanctions that they have. Now, I'm going to pause there, if I may. I'm going to just ask if there are any burning questions that people have. Does anyone want to ask any burning questions? You can take yourself off mute for a minute or two. Any burning questions?
Alison. There was a question in the chat from Ivan.
Yeah.
Ivan asks, if a building is less than 11 metres, how often do safety/fire risk inspections need to be done?
I would say every 3 years, and that's typically what the law, the 2005 legislation, does not specify a frequency, but typically people seem to be going for every 3 years. You can do it more frequently. Be careful about doing less frequently, because I think 3 years is about the limit. Okay, does that help, Ivan? You can come off mute if you want, Ivan. Okay, don't worry. Oh
Said
yeah, I've got,
yes.
yeah, he said yes. Okay. And any other burning questions before I continue? Well, I mean, is that because I'm doing such a fantastic job at explaining everything? Is that what it is? All right, maybe not.
Yes, Basil, you're doing a fantastic job. Yes.
Thank you very much. I like it when people humor me. Okay, let's go on to this very, very busy slide. And I am sorry for the busyness of this slide. But do you know something? I think it does reflect the sort of work that you need to do, and the amount of work that you need to bring together to satisfy what's in this new bit of legislation. Everything that's in yellow is related to your golden thread documentation and information. Everything in green is to do with resident engagement. Everything in blue is your client information. Everything in red is a sort of work that we and maybe another consultant would do for you to help you bring everything together into a document or documentation that can be submitted to the Building Safety Regulator. And I'd say this is about the right people at the right time and the right information. So let me just zoom in, if I may. I'm going to try to zoom in. Yeah, and so you can see some of this. You see fire door survey, fire risk assessment, compartmentation survey, structural assessment, a whole load of, I mean, this is just a flavor. I mean, it's not everything, but the sort of golden thread information that you're required to have. And then when you talk about your resident engagement strategy has got to encompass a whole range of things. And you've got to talk about, how do you communicate with your residents? How do you communicate if there's a new bit of safety information you need to get across to them? How do you communicate that you're going to make sure that remediation work is going to take place and engage them in that process? How do you engage with your residents if English is not their first language? And you're going to have to describe all of these things in your resident engagement strategies. That's really quite important. Then you over here with your client information. This is about making sure you've got the right professionals that are helping you to develop the systems, the procedures, the information, and ultimately the building safety case and the building safety case report that you need in order to send up to the building safety regulator. So I don't know if you can see it. Oopsie daisy. I always do that. I don't know if you can see in the middle there, I've got these big words, building safety case, because that building safety case becomes almost like the repository, that central system that you use to manage your building. It holds your information electronically. It's what you use to make sure that you're keeping up to date, make sure that you can demonstrate that you're managing your risks. Okay, so that's what your building safety case is. It's a live bit of kit that can demonstrate to the building safety regulator that, listen, I'm on top of this building. Your building safety case report is a snapshot in time of how you are managing those risks at that building. I hope you can see the distinction between building safety case as the, if you like, the repository, the way that you're able to show and demonstrate that you are managing your building, okay, and a building safety case report being just a snapshot in time of how you've done that on this day in December, okay. So look, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of work to do with different professionals. It's not just one professional involved in this. And it's about making sure that you as the building owner, as the building manager, have got competent people around you that are providing this information, supplying this information. So your building safety case needs to be a structured narrative. It needs to be evidence as well. I don't think it's not a collection of documents that say, we have a resident engagement strategy, full stop, and it works well, full stop. You can't just do that. You have to evidence that the resident engagement is working. Demonstrate that you do have regular events that allow residents to pass information to you, and that you deal with that information and get back to them, etc. That there's two-way communication going on. So, and your building safety case really is about evidencing that you are managing the risks associated with your building. This is right at the core of what the Act's talking about. It's about understanding the risks, identifying those risks, quantifying them, and dealing with them, mitigating against them, so that the risk is now tolerable, whether that be a fire-related risk or a structural stability related risk. Just so that you understand, I mean, the structure of a building might be made of steel, and you might say, well, steel, nothing's going to happen to steel. I mean, it doesn't even burn. And you're right. But here's one of the things about steel. Steel, if you heat it up to about 450 degrees, 500 degrees C, it loses approximately 40% of its strength. Now, that might not mean it will break up, but what it does mean is it might collapse. And so what it was designed to do, it can no longer do. So the Act is concerned about things like that. Does the steel have enough protection to make sure it can do the job it was designed to do for the period that we need it to do it? Another thing you need to be aware of, if you have a building and its structure is made of steel, and you are located near the sea, the very fact that you're located near the sea and salt, a lot more salt is in the air, that salt will attack the steel. And if it attacks the steel over many years, the strength of the steel will be affected. Now you can see what the Act is concerned about. It's concerned that if you have responsibility for a building, that you keep an eye on your building, keep looking at the risks associated with your building, and you keep managing the risks. But to do that, you need to make sure you've got competent people involved in helping you assess your building. It's the same with the fire. Now, everybody knows that a fire is going to start in a flat at some point. That's not the question. The question is, can fire move from one flat to the flat directly above? That's what shouldn't happen. So we accept a fire will start in a flat by virtue of the fact that our flats are filled with combustible material. So that's not good. You're not going to stop a fire occurring in a flat. But what must not happen is the fire spreads from that flat into adjacent flats. That must not happen, as it did at Grenfell, because when that happens, it gets uncontrollable. And the speed at which fire can move upwards it can be alarming. It can be scary how quickly it can move. So these are the sorts of risks that the Act is concerned about, that you start to quantify, that you start to mitigate against, and demonstrate that you're doing so. So your building safety case report will summarize, what you're doing at this moment in time. It will identify the key risks that you've found. It'll say, look, I'm missing some information. But the very fact that I know I'm missing the information means that I'm in control of the risk. I know there is a risk there. It's when I don't know what I don't know that there's a problem. So that's the sort of building safety case report that we will develop for our clients to make sure that it's clear to the building safety regulator. We know if there's a gap, and we've got a plan for filling that gap. Now there's a role here that is not a it's not a statutory role. This is not mentioned in the Act, but I can't help but feel that a role like this is needed, because there is no way that a PAP or an AP is going to be doing all of this work that I've described to you. I suspect that they're busy doing all sorts of things, and they won't be involved in writing procedures and processes around how they're going to manage risks, how they're going to report to the building safety regulator. They might sign these things off, but they're not going to prepare them, I would suggest, okay? But they're not going to be involved in day-to-day with the professionals that are coming into the building and helping to identify the risk, helping to mitigate the risks. So I think there's probably someone in between, and I'm calling them a building safety manager, that will deal with all of those day-to-day things. And I think there's two questions that person needs to be asking or answering. And the first question is, can the safety risks be identified, clearly identified, okay? And the second question is, can evidence be shown for how those risks are being managed? And I think that captures what they've got to do, and therefore capture in the documentation and capture in the building safety case report ultimately, okay? Just lest you thought that, you know, you are left alone to do things and come up with how you do all of this, you know, managing safety risks by yourself, I want to let you know that there is a competency framework out there that helps you manage building safety risks. So be aware of PAS 86. I mean, I hope you know what a PAS is, by the way. People are always surprised when I tell them what a PAS is. I mean, it is actually a British standard document, okay? So it's a BSI document, but unlike a BSI, which takes years and years to develop, a PAS is developed very, very quickly. So if a PAS is developed when they haven't got time to do a proper British standard. So yes, it is a document that you use as a code to follow, but it's one where, you know, they haven't had enough time to do all the work that they need to do a proper British standard. So, you know, please, you know, I know that people see, you know, PAS 9980 as the be all and end all, but the bottom line is it's a rushed document at the end of the day. It's put together quickly so that there is something out there for people to follow, okay? I think it's called a publicly available specification. That's what PAS stands for. Just be aware of these little things, but be aware that you're not alone. You've got a bit of documentation out there that can help you understand, identify, and manage building safety risks. And it goes through things like risk management and the golden thread documentation, things like managing change, things that you should be aware of and understand. So do be aware of that document, and if you can get hold of it, maybe utilize that to help you with your managing of buildings. Now, I thought I'd give this a bit of an overview so that you've got a sense of how things operate strategically. And I hope this is helpful. So since the Building Safety Act 22, you've got this new building safety regulator that sits under the HSE, okay? And from the building safety regulator, there's these three sort of, I'm going to call them committees or panel. There's a resident panel, and that is to make sure that that robust framework for residents is in place, and that making sure that when residents complain, that's been dealt with, etc. And there's learning from that, learning best practice that's maybe spread from the building safety regulator. There's also this building advisory committee and a competence committee, and this is all about making sure that materials are to the quality that they need to be, because there has been question marks about the materials that we're using in our buildings. And B, it's about the competence of the individuals in this industry, making sure that people are qualified and capable of doing the job that they are required to do. On the right-hand side here, the inspectors, Building Safety Regulator is still trying to recruit people to assist them, to assess buildings, etc. Like I've told you already, they do have quite a backlog of buildings. You then have below that your PAP, your principal accountable person. This is the person that is, you know, mentioned in law. You've got also an accountable person, but this person here has responsibilities under the Act that he or she cannot delegate to somebody else. Now, don't get me wrong, the tasks associated with making sure that risks are identified, making sure that, you know, you've got a digitally held repository of golden thread information, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, you can delegate the tasks. What you can't do is delegate the responsibility, the legal responsibility that's placed on that person or company in the legislation. So please be aware of that. They can't delegate those responsibilities. And you remember the list that I gave you, you know, they're there to identify the risk. They're there to make sure that they're reporting information back up to the Building Safety Regulator. They have responsibilities, various things, and they can't say, well, you know, so and so didn't do that. They're putting place. They have a responsibility to make sure that it is working. You can't go back to the Building Safety Regulator and say, well, it's his fault. You are responsible under the law if you are a PAP. I've put in there a building safety manager because I can't see the PAP directly doing everything every day, but you know, it's not a mandatory role. This is not a role that is mentioned in the Act. But there's a whole host of professionals that should be involved in this. And I've given just a few here: fire engineers, structural engineers, facade engineers, fire door surveyors, fire risk assessors. All of these and more should be involved in making sure you've got competent people helping you to identify the risks and mitigate against those risks over time, so that you can demonstrate to the Building Safety Regulator that you have got control of this building. So takeaways from the presentation I've given you. First of all, the Building Safety Regulator has jurisdiction of all high-risk buildings. Any building that is 7 stories or more, or 18 meters or more, comes under the Building Safety Regulator. In other words, unlike before, you used to be able to go to a private building control body. You used to be able to go to the council and say, now I want you to be my building control body. You cannot do that anymore for buildings that are 7 stories or 18 meters and above. You can't do that anymore. That choice is removed from you. It is now called a high-risk building, and it sits with the Building Safety Regulator. The Building Safety Regulator has jurisdiction over all parts of building regulations, not just Part A and Part B. Sorry, I didn't explain that, but Part A relates to structure and Part B relates to fire. Although the legislation is about structure and fire, the Building Safety Regulator has jurisdiction over all parts of building regulations. I just want to make sure that is clear. And do think through the implications of that, by the way, because that's huge. That is an absolutely huge responsibility that the Building Safety Regulator is taking on. There is a massive impetus on making sure that there are improvements in the industry, improvements in competence of individuals that are being used to help identify risks and mitigate risk, but also in the products that are being used to build our buildings. And the Building Safety Regulator has jurisdiction over all of that. Understand that the PAP, the principal accountable person, has legal obligations. Those legal obligations cannot be delegated. The PAP might be an individual, or the PAP could be a company, but it's got to be an entity that can be taken to court and can be prosecuted. They cannot delegate their responsibilities. Remember that residents have rights, and they have the ability to bypass the building owner, the building manager, and go directly to the Building Safety Regulator. I think this is a scary one, actually, because you could have, all of a sudden, the Building Safety Regulator coming down on you based on feedback that he's receiving from residents, directly from residents. So just be aware of that. Be aware that the golden thread information that you must hold for your building must be accessible, and it must be digitally held. Okay, that's what it says in legislation. So just be aware of that. And I think the final thing to note is there is a duty on all of us that are involved in this industry, including myself. Anybody who has any sort of stake in these buildings, we've got to work together to fulfill the responsibility and uphold the Act's objectives. So I've taken you through a lot of the problems, okay? And what I wanted to do was spend a little bit of time talking you through solutions that we've brought, for example, to some of our clients, and I'm happy to help you with as well if that's what you need. What we've developed is a portal that allows you to hold your golden thread information and effectively becomes your building safety case, because it identifies the risks. It makes sure that you have a live management system for managing your building. When a contractor comes in to check the alarm system, and another one comes in to check the lifts, and another one comes in to check the lighting, they will give you certificates, and you will just upload the certificates to the portal to show that you are remaining compliant. Okay, so it becomes the way that you manage your compliance with the new Act. But what's fantastic about it is, if you want, you can give access to the Building Safety Regulator himself, so that they can see for themselves how you are managing your building and what the evidence is for that. So let me just show you a bit of a live data, if I may, right, here we are, of the portal. So a very quick demonstration. This is what our clients receive. They'll receive a log on to our portal. And the first thing they'll see is a dashboard. I love it when you first go into the dashboard, you see this heartbeat type thing while it flashes up, before it flashes up what the information is. There it goes, heartbeat. And then it tells you on the top left there, any messages that you've got. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a contractor wanted to go into the building and occupy floors 5 and 6 of your building and do some work there. They need to get their permit to work signed off by you. So that message will be in here, and then you'll be able to go to your permit to work section of the portal, sign it off if you're happy to, so that they can get on with the work. And it's part of how you manage the building. A list of all of your buildings will come up here. By the way, this is just a make-believe set of things here. It's not real, but just to demonstrate what sort of thing happens. But you get a list of your buildings here, and you can click into any one of them and go directly into one of your buildings. You get an alert here down on the bottom left, and that basically will tell you, your alarm system is due for checking in the next 2 months. Can you send a competent contractor down to make sure that that's been dealt with? Okay. Now, there's several things that you can do. You can create a new building, and that's the first thing that you'd be asked to do, is create your building on the portal. It's very important to do that so that you can start to associate things with your new building. So you'll put in an image You'll put in the name of your building, the address of your building, etc. Okay, building type, the year that the building was built, and an image of the building will come up there when you put the image in. And one of the things that you need to be aware of, we don't actually ask you to put your documents on this. We say to you, you hold your documents where you hold your documents. What we want is a URL, and we want a hyperlink to that document. So this portal doesn't actually hold the images or the documents. It holds a link, and you'll see the power of that later on when I show you the report that gets produced from this. All your buildings will be listed here under list, and we can. I'm going to choose a building that we've submitted to the Building Safety Regulator. So here we go. Here's one. So there's the summary information that they put in, the name of the accountable person, the name of the building, and the address, etc. There's an image of the building that's come up there. Once you've got that, you can then start to, with your information gathering. Can you see on the left-hand side here? It says information gathering. So the first bit of information gathering is your golden thread. And this golden thread, by the way, we've got sort of 3 pages of it. Can you see there? 3 pages of this golden thread information that you need to upload and put in. So if you have got a fire strategy, we'll ask you to upload your fire strategy, but we don't want you to upload the document. Again, we ask you to upload the actual hyperlink to wherever you've saved your document, and there it is in all its glory. Okay, so that's all we're interested in. We're not interested in the actual document, but like I say, you'll see the power of this when it comes to the report in a bit. So you just keep going through, and I don't know if you can see the blue roundels here. Can you see the blue roundels? And it says 1 in that one. That means there's 1 document there. And in this one, it says 5. That means there's 5 documents in this one. So there's 5 risk assessments that have been updated over time, etc., or whatever. So again, you've got a hyperlink, not the actual document, but a hyperlink to the document itself. Okay. And we keep on doing that. We keep on asking you to do that. Now, you won't have everything. And so all we ask you to do is just be honest and say nil return. Because all we're going to do to the Building Safety Regulator is tell them, we don't have this document, but we have plans to put that in place. In other words, we know it's missing. Because I think when you don't know something's missing is part of the problem. That is a risk in itself. If you know it's missing, you've got plans to deal with the gaps, then I don't think anybody can criticize that. You are moving towards identifying the risk, managing the risk, mitigating the risk as well over time. And we just go through the 3 pages uploading that information. Then we go on to sort of like the resident engagement, mandatory occurrence reporting, etc. And we do a similar thing. You just upload the information, the hyperlinks. But again, if you don't have the information, you just click nil return. Okay, don't worry about the fact that this one here says multi-channel communication. Recognizing the diversity of the residents. They may not have English as their first language. So it's recognizing that. Do you understand your residents? We need to tell the Building Safety Regulator how we understand and demonstrate why we understand. And you go through all of those and you come to this section here, which is a gap analysis. And basically this allows you to generate a report of all of the things that you have selected nil return for, and it'll explain to you what that document is, why it's important. Okay, so you can understand the urgency with which you need to get hold of that document. And it may not be that necessary. I mean, that access plan may not be an urgent thing to get straight away, but over time you sort it out. I don't know if you can see there's a grey area here. Everything else is blue. Everything else is blue, but this little bit is grey. And the reason it's grey is because it's the only bit that while you'll be able to see as a client, you'll be able to see what's in it, but you can't alter it. And the reason is because I want to be able to tell the building safety regulator that this is I want to be able to tell them that this is an independent risk assessment. Okay, so we will risk assess that, and we will give it a score. So occurrence reporting, mandatory occurrence reporting, resident engagement, safety management system testing. I'll just show you some of the systems testing. Look, Part 6 alarm systems, fire doors, smoke extraction. Do these things exist? In some cases they don't. So we'll give the worst score. That's a 5. In some cases they do exist. But maybe they're not working as well as they should, or there isn't much evidence of them working well, so I might give a 3. Or they might be working very, very well, and there's a lot of evidence of how this is working, and they're managing this area very, very well, and that might get a 1 or a 2. So we quantify independently quantify the risk, and the same is done about the cladding as well. So we'll do a cladding risk assessment. And then in the end, we will produce for you a report. And by pressing a button, the button automatically produces a report, a building safety case report, that's based on the information that our client has put into the portal. And it will draw that information and start to order it. And so, for example, one of the things it will do is it will set out a prioritized plan, an action plan. So it'll say what's missing and say what needs to be done, the areas that need to be improved, and give timescales which we agree with our clients, what sort of timescales we will do that work in. And it just makes it very, very clear to the building safety regulator that we are in control of this building, and even where there are gaps, we understand those gaps, we're planning to fill those gaps, and we will deliver. And so you go through the document, and I don't know if you can see, but there are a number of links, and again, all you do is click on them, and instead of having masses of appendices, you just click on the link, and you immediately, the building safety regulator can go straight to the information that's held on your portal. So it's actually really quite powerful stuff. It's a much shorter document because of this. Okay, so you go through the risk, we identify the risk. So here there's a risk assessment of the external wall. I'm sitting here hoping and praying that this works, by the way, but yeah, there you go. There's their risk assessment. Now, if I had to submit all of this as an appendix, it would be a huge document. Well, we don't want that. What we're trying to demonstrate to the building safety regulators, look, we've got this under control. All the documentation is here, and you can see it for yourself if you need to. And we just keep going through like that, demonstrating various things. Change control. We've got a procedure here for risk assessment and change control. So have a quick look at that. So this is a document that we wrote for them. Change control procedure for them. Examples of change control: structural modification, systems upgrades, usage changes. These are what we will need to control changes within those sorts of environments, and this is how we will do it. Okay, so we try to explain this to the building safety regulator. I can't seem to get out of this now. Just hold on a second. Right, okay. Let's go back to that. So you have a range of stuff. I mean, I won't go through the report anymore, but you can start to see what this system does is it allows you to have this repository that keeps everything electronic forever and a day. You can update it, demonstrating that you are managing your building properly. You can develop a building safety case report anytime you want to and send that off to the building safety regulator to demonstrate. If they request one, you can give it them, at any time. So it's quite a powerful system, and you can demonstrate that you have complied with the regulation and that you are continuously improving your building, because it won't be perfect to start off with. There's a whole permit to work scheme. The procedure is there. There's a form that the contractor will need to set up and ask for permission to come into the building. But you or the building manager needs to sign that off, and it's all done electronically, and the building safety regulator can see that this is being done. You've got your ability as well to manage users. You can invite users as you want to. You can select what it is that you need to give them rights to. So if they are a contractor, they'll only see a certain proportion of the portal because they only need to. But if they are an acting PAP rather than the actual PAP, if they're acting on your behalf, then they'll get limited rights as well. Okay, now I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to ask if there are any questions.